This video was made possible by War Thunder. 1943, a fleet of US flying fortresses conducts a sortie over northern Germany. They experience something extraordinary.
Keep your eyes open.
Breaking 11. Planes 9 o'clock coming around.
What was that? What the hell was that? It went by like we were standing still. What the hell is it? Blue leader to group. Get off the air.
This is the ME-262. It's the world's first jet fighter. It's mid-1940, a year after the start of World War II. Hitler's taken over most of France and decides to attack Britain with 10,000 planes, what becomes known as the Battle of Britain. Initially taken aback, a surprise attack by the British on Berlin deeply angers Hitler, and he switches targets from military to civilian, giving the British Air Force chance to recover. It then became very apparent to the Germans that without the element of surprise, most of their aircraft were seriously outclassed. After suffering severe losses, the Nazi chain of command, Hitler, Göring, Milch and Speer, urgently requested the design of a superior plane. Unfortunately, back in 1935, a German, Hans von Ohain, had borrowed some ideas from a British engineer, Frank Whittle's patent for the world's first working jet engine. Whittle's engine didn't work in a jet, he was using the wrong fuels, but in 1939, the German company Heinkel cracked the problem to prototype the first ever jet plane, the HE-178. 2 years later, Messerschmitt tested the 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, a plane that would end up being 100 miles an hour faster than any Allied plane. This is its actual closing speed. It's hard to tell how many variants of the 262 there actually were, because in 1945 Hitler started renaming equipment with epic names to help the war effort. Like this, the A-Class, the fighter variant, codenamed Schwalbe, the Swallow, carried 4 Rheinmetall Mark 108 30mm cannons. The Allies dubbed them the Pneumatic Hammer. Fired incendiary or Type M Minengeschoss high-explosive shells. 1 or 2 hits could take down a 4-engine bomber, compared with 20 20mm hits. They disintegrated bombers that fast they had to put these conical mesh shields over the air intakes because debris were causing 262s to crash. The cannons only had a 600-meter range and a 6-story building ballistic drop, so you only had 2 seconds to aim and fire. The B-Class was the bomber variant, codenamed Sturmvogel, Stormbird. I think the idea was to replace the aging but iconic Stuka-Dive bomber. Hitler only wanted this variant, but the rest of the high command, seeing the plane work better as a fighter interceptor, created the other variants anyway. Hitler found out about this a few months later and flew into a rage at Milch. To which a brave Milch replied, "Führer, even the smallest child can see that this is a fighter, not a bomber." To make the plane a better interceptor, the C-Class, the Heimatschütze Homeland Defender, was built. It had a rocket engine in the tail so the planes could scramble faster, making them less vulnerable to rat catching by Allied planes scouting the airfields. With the rockets though, the plane could take off with a 1,000-kilogram payload on a standard runway. These bombs were kind of clever, the wheels broke off after takeoff to make them more aerodynamic. Never made it into full production though, because there was a bit of a problem with the rocket fuel tending to dissolve pilots. Usually happened in this little toy plane actually, the ME-163. That's a real plane by the way. I don't know who designed that. But they used to fill them with this nasty stuff called C-Stuff and T-Stuff used as an oxidizer and fuel in the rocket engines, and they were aliens level corrosive. Now, as if the 30mm cannons weren't enough, the Germans built this, the E-Class, the Formation Destroyer. It's got a 50mm Mark 214 cannon in the nose, in case you need a flying tank or something. It was never properly tested though, because German production had been hit so hard late in the war, there were only 6 rounds in the entire Munich area for that type of cannon. A better invention was these R4 Orkan Hurricane rockets, cheap to make from pressed steel, and one hit could take down a bomber. They also used the 30mm sights, so you'd release the rockets at 1,000 meters out when the bombers filled 2 notches on the reticule, and then when the bombers filled the circle, you knew you were 600 meters out and could start firing with the cannons. Before we get any further though, thanks to today's sponsor War Thunder, which of course has the ME262 in it because it's the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Available now for free on PC and consoles, featuring 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from armoured cars of the 1920s to fighter jets and modern main battle tanks. The game puts you at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time, with intense combat, incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics and authentic sound effects. Join today a worldwide community of 70 million players in epic PvP battles and discover a wealth of high quality content in one of the most immersive games for fans of military history. Please sign up using the limited time link in the description or pinned comment for a massive bonus pack for new players and those who haven't played for 6 months, including an exclusive vehicle Eagle of Valor decorator, 100,000 silver lions and 7 days of premium account. Thank you for checking out the game. Your support makes these videos possible. The 262's main role, against Hitler's orders, was to intercept B-17 flying fortresses. And boy oh boy, did those big boys live up to their name. This is their actual turret coverage, and they're all 50 cals. Got a bit of a short straw though if you took the ball turret, because not only was there no space in there for a parachute, there was also a lever that ejected the whole ball turret. Usually so the plane could do a wheels up landing, but I guess you'd be sat there thinking, what if a bullet hits that? You were protected though by these beautiful chrome beasts, P-51 Mustangs. The 262s, you see, with their speed, could get through the fighter screen, but they couldn't hang around because if the P-51s dropped their drop tanks, they could comfortably outmaneuver them. Compared to piston propeller engines though, these Jumo 004 jet engines were like something from Star Trek, honestly. She produced 3,200 horsepower with both engines, double that of the P-51. You start it by pulling this little handle on the front, like a lawnmower. It's got a little starter motor in it that gets the engine sucking. And my goodness, could she suck, like you would not believe. We're talking like literally the air out of a 2-story house every minute. This air is then compressed 10 to 40 times before liquid fuel vapour is sprayed in and ignited, producing a stream of superheated gases which turns this turbine and powers the compressor. The amount of gas ejected to push the plane forwards is controlled by this Zwiebel or onion contraption. And these gases are like 2,000 degrees. It's actually why the plane has a nose wheel. They tried it with a rear wheel, but with the jets angled onto the runway, they ended up setting fire to the tarmac. Jet engines have tens of thousands of components, so as you can imagine, there were great delays. The first 262 prototypes actually had propellers on their noses because the engines weren't ready. And the race was on. The UK was prototyping their own jet, the Gloucester Meteor. The fuel tanks were positioned before and after the cockpit. Now you might be thinking, what if that gets hit by a high explosive round? Well, fortunately, the cockpit was armoured and designed to break free. They were going to put in an ejector seat, but they didn't. So it was kind of more like... They called it the Vanny, the tub. There wasn't even space in there for a seat cushion. The pilots had to sit on their parachutes. Because of the shortage of strategic metals, like nickel and cobalt, the turbines in the jet engines only had a runtime of 25 hours before they had to be replaced. They did consider supplementing them with this crazy Lorin ramjet design, but it would have taken 1.5 tons of fuel to get to cruising altitude, so they decided against it. Could have gone 1,000 kilometers an hour though, but that speed's a problem for pilots. The Allies had the Franks flying G-suit, which had inflatable bladders to push blood back to your head. The Germans, on the other hand, preferred to look cool, whilst unconscious, in their Hugo Boss Luftwaffe leather jackets. As the 262's engineers found, there's actually a lot of problems even for modern planes travelling at the speed of sound, which is Mach 1, 1,234 kilometers an hour. That's an easy one to remember. You see, air is viscous, which means when you fly, there's a very thin layer which kind of sticks, like water, to the wing. It's called the boundary layer. When the angle of the wing becomes too steep, those air particles can't hang on anymore, and they tumble off, becoming turbulent. This causes drag, reduced manoeuvrability, and potentially causes the plane to have less lift. A plane flies because the shape of the wing causes air particles to go faster over the top than the bottom, creating low pressure above, and then the plane is basically sucked upwards. But this means you might only be going Mach 0.6, but the air over the wings could be way over Mach 1. In fact, pretty much anything past Mach 0.8, which is called transonic air speeds, air particles really struggle to hold on, so they tumble, and you end up with something called wave drag, which causes massive vibrations and shock waves through the plane. It's why helicopters don't have insanely long rotor blades, because you can get transonic air speeds at the tips, and the turbulence can cause them to crash. And this drag is really strong. It's actually where the concept of a sound barrier came from, because in World War II they thought that engines would actually never be powerful enough to overcome it. You can reduce the effects with a thin wasp-waist fuselage design, which was actually discovered by a German, Otto Frenzel, in 1943. It's why the Germans made this monstrosity, the Ju-287. You see, it's also got forward swept wings, and swept wings help as well. If you sweep them back a little bit, like the 262, they help a bit, but if you sweep them forwards, they help a lot, and some modern jet designs, like the Su-47 Berkut, have tried this. You see, the trade-off, though, is you lose a lot of low-speed manoeuvrability. You can also change the shape of the wing, what's called a supercritical aerofoil design, which helps to soften the shockwave where the boundary layer separates and becomes turbulent. You can sometimes see this shockwave line when flying on passenger planes. As Walter Schuck wrenched his 262 to the side to get out the line of fire, the Mustang hurtled past, all guns blazing. Smoke started pouring from his port engine, and the cowling began to peel back like a tin of sardines. With a bang vis-a-vis, the exhaust coat flew out the back of the engine. Walter had to get out. The engine could explode at any moment and rip the wing off. He jettisoned the canopy, levered himself onto the edge of the cockpit, and tried to bail, but the jet was too fast. The airstream kept pushing him down into his seat. Then he remembered the advice of a colleague. You've got to take the power right off, and the moment you've pulled yourself up, immediately put one foot on the stick and give it a hefty kick so the crate points her nose downwards and you're thrown clear and won't hit your head or body on the tail fin. It worked. His parachute opened and Walter was able to make it to the ground. He'd sprained his ankles but quickly reeled in his parachute and lay on top of it. German pilots had heard a lot of stories of Allies ground strafing parachuters. After laying still for a while until he couldn't hear the sound of bombers anymore, he noticed a passing baker's boy on a bicycle and asked him to give him a lift to his nearby girlfriend's house. As he stood outside, still with his parachute, her startled mother opened the door. "Ach, Walter, put that thing down. It's all over. The war is lost." Later that evening, he got a lift back to Oranienburg airfield. It had been heavily bombed, but he was pleased to find his quarters were still standing. He couldn't wait to get in there, get his hands on that bottle of Hennessy he'd kept for special occasions in the suitcase in his room. Opening the case, he found that the carefully hoarded treasure had disappeared. Fuming, he summoned his orderly, Chiefy, and asked him where the cognac had gone. With his eyes fixed on the ground, Chiefy stammered, "Herr Oberleutnant, I didn't think you'd be coming back, and so I allowed myself the liberty of drinking to your memory." But how had it come to this? How had Germany's superplane had such a small impact on the war? We've probably seen through this video a little of the conflicting motives of the parties involved. Messerschmitt was struggling at the start of the war. They designed a replacement for the Bf-110 fighter bomber, the Me-210, but it was virtually unflyable and a huge financial failure. They may have gone under if their main competitor Heinkel hadn't been continuously snubbed by Nazi high command. In creating the 262, they'd made a product that made their entire stock obsolete. not ideal for profits and not a massive incentive to push forwards. They'd no idea of cost, which wasn't helped by Hitler mercilessly conscripting much of their workforce. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, unrealistically expected a superplane. What they actually got was a very good plane, but also a plane where over-tightening a screw on the nose wheel would stop it retracting, causing a catastrophic crash. That's if you hadn't already accidentally fired the wing rockets into the cockpit by adjusting your seat because the trigger cable ran too close to it. Hitler was determined to have his Stormbird, a fighter bomber to repel the Allied ground invasion at the beaches, so for months the 262 was forced under silly rules like you couldn't fly above 4,000 metres or faster than 750 kilometres an hour. You weren't allowed to dive to bomb things, which tended to make hitting targets a bit difficult. Despite this, by some miracle, and by miracle I mean Mauthausen concentration camp labour, there is a reason they call these the Stairs of Death, Messerschmitt managed to produce 1,400, but logistical and repair issues meant only 100 were ever combat ready. It's not ideal when the Luftwaffe needed a 4-to-1 KD to prevail in the skies. I'm sure you can see it was all way too little too late. But then you gotta think, well, Hitler had a deal with Japan to supply them 262s. Now that never went through, but if it did, the war in the Pacific went on much longer after Germany's surrender. The Japanese tried a jet plane with the Nakajima Kika, but it was miles behind. Imagine the Japanese had an uncatchable plane that could intercept, say, B-29s carrying atomic bombs. As the Allies took back Germany, the US began Operation Lusty that took Luftwaffe's secret technology and scientists back to the US to study, keep it out of Soviet hands. Most of the equipment was sabotaged, but a lot of 262s were left in perfect condition. And it makes you wonder, maybe the Germans left them because they wanted the Allies to see their technological achievement. And they should be proud, because without their work, the F-100, the USA's first supersonic jet, would have been a lot longer coming than just in the 1950s. So here's to one of the most iconic, beautiful, influential, and underutilized planes of the Second World War. Thank you again to War Thunder for supporting this video. They've asked me to give you a quick reminder at the end that the limited time link in the description and pinned comment gives a massive bonus pack for new players and those who haven't played for 6 months, including an exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. See you in the next video.